Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping physicians in Michigan turn their professional success into financial success while enjoying life along the way. And now, here are your hosts, Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Physician's Guide to Financial Wellness. This is Trent DeBruin, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Mushbaugh. And today we're going to talk about how to allocate your cash flow. And this is one of the most common questions we hear from physicians, especially those who are earlier in their careers. And typical situation we come across is a younger attending who is used to earning that resident or fellow income, but is now earning the attending income and isn't sure exactly what to do with that. And this is often what prompts them to reach out to us in the first place. And it's such a unique situation since very few professions have this big of a jump in income from one year to the next. You go from a situation where you might be just covering all of your expenses and required savings to one where suddenly there's extra money to go around. And it can almost become a situation of paralysis by analysis. You're unsure what to do with the cash, so you don't do anything, and then you end up accumulating a sizable amount of cash in a bank account. And eventually it reaches the point of, okay, I should probably do something now and put together a plan here.
Yeah, especially since the big banks are generously paying you a nice 0.01% interest there.
Exactly. And it's not just the younger attendings. We also see this situation with older attendings as well, where the kids are finally off to college or graduated from college and your expenses drop because they're no longer living with you or you're no longer making those tuition and room and board payments each year.
Yeah, well, you're not officially free until the kids are off the cell phone bill.
That's true. But if they are off the cell phone bill and maybe even they're picking up the dinner tab once in a while, you can find yourself in that situation where you suddenly have extra cash flow available and start thinking about things like whether you should pay ahead on the mortgage, start saving more for retirement, or maybe even put more toward another goal like a vacation home.
Yeah, and so when thinking about cash flow, we like to think about it like a pitcher of water. You know, we all have a certain amount of water in the pitcher, with the water being your cash flow. And then we think about the various uses or goals for your cash flow as various cups. And these cups are things like saving for retirement, college, a vacation, or a down payment on your forever home. Now, if you had enough cash flow or water in your pitcher to fully fill and fund all of those various goals you have, then you'd be all set and planning would be much easier. However, if you're like most people, you aren't able to fully fund your goals all in one year. And this is where you then have to understand trade-offs and prioritize how you'll use that water pitcher to fill the various cups. And everyone is different here, and as you'll get used to hearing us say, there's no right or wrong answer here, and everyone has a different perspective. The idea is that you want to decide both how much and in what order you want to use the water pitcher to fill up those different cups/goals that you have.
Now, before we get too far into the discussion, it probably makes sense to start with the basics and just explain what exactly we mean when we talk about cash flow. So the basic definition of cash flow is the income you earn minus the taxes you pay. In other words, the money that's available to spend, save, invest, or pay down debt. And as a simple example, if you have $350,000 of income and you pay $80,000 in federal and state taxes, your cash flow is $350,000 minus $80,000 or $270,000. Now, when we say your cash flow is the money that's available to spend, save, invest, or pay down debt, we recognize that a good portion of our spending is on necessities, things that you have to spend on, like food, clothing, and utilities. And while you do have some control over how much you spend on those things, when we talk about the decision of how to allocate your cash flow, we're mainly referring to the money that's left over after covering your basic necessities and that fixed spending. And one of the key things to keep in mind, as Andrew mentioned, is that we all have a certain amount or a certain size pitcher. And as a physician, depending on your situation, there may be more or fewer options in terms of things you can do to increase the size of your pitcher. For some physicians, you can do things like moonlighting, increasing your caseload, or doing consulting work to increase your income. But for others, that isn't an option. So when thinking about the cash flow discussion and that analogy that Andrew just shared, in addition to thinking about allocating the cash flow you have, also keep in mind this other side of the coin and the size of your pitcher and your options there. So with that understanding of cash flow, how should we think about allocating it across different uses? Well, there are two sides of the equation. The quantitative side, so strictly the numbers, and the qualitative side, or some of the softer aspects. And we'll start with the numbers.
Yeah, so looking purely at the financial side of the equation, the math is fairly simple. And people often start with asking the wrong first question, which can overcomplicate things. And instead of asking whether you should pay down debt or if you should invest the additional cash flow, we think a better place to start is at a higher level of asking what is going to give you the best return on your cash flow. And so the first place to start is to get organized, because that helps you make more intentional decisions. So you start by looking at your current debt that you have and what interest rate you are paying on that debt. And with interest rates as low as they are right now, you may have a mortgage at 3% and student loan payments at 4%. And so assuming you aren't going for public service loan forgiveness, and you know that you're going to plan to pay off that debt eventually, you need to ask yourself the first question of what's the best return on my cash flow? And so if you plan to pay down debt, you're going to get a guaranteed return of 4%. Now, if you compare that to sitting on $100,000 of cash in the bank earning 0%, then in isolation, then you'd be better off paying down debt at 4% because otherwise you're losing 4% on that $100,000 earning absolutely nothing in the bank. However, if you compared that 3 to 4% interest you're paying on the debt relative to what you can earn long term, then the story changes. Historically, you'll earn 10% by investing in stocks long term and 4 to 5% investing in bonds long term. So looking through the lens of investing versus paying down debt, you can see that long term, the best use of your cash flow would be to invest it, knowing that you'll earn more long term by investing versus using that extra cash flow to pay down debt. Now, of course, this is going to vary by time period. In the shorter the time period, over say 6 to 12 months, the stock market could be down, in which case you would have been better off paying down the debt. However, no one has a crystal ball, and so it's impossible to know ahead of time what will happen to the stock market and if you'll be better off over any shorter period of time. But with the right perspective, you know that long term, at least purely from a financial perspective, the odds are better off that you can earn more money by investing your extra cash flow versus using it to pay down debt.
When thinking about how to allocate your cash flow, the numbers are certainly important, but there's also the softer side of things. And this doesn't always get the same level of attention, but from our perspective, it's just as important. People aren't computers and there are feelings and emotions involved, so make sure you consider both sides of the coin when thinking about this issue. And one of the best examples of this is that idea of paying back debt faster than what's required versus using that money for other things like investing for retirement. We know that different people feel differently about debt. Some physicians are fine owing hundreds of thousands of dollars, while others are stressed out owing anything at all. If you're someone who falls into that latter camp, it might make sense to pay back debt faster than what's required, even if it isn't the quote financially optimal approach. It's tough to put a price on peace of mind, and if getting rid of your debt sooner is going to lower your stress and help you sleep better at night, that's worth a lot in our opinion. So know that you don't always need to focus only on what's financially optimal. And the qualitative aspects also come into play when you have competing goals and there's not enough cash flow to go around. So those situations where your water pitcher isn't big enough to fill up all your cups, which tends to be the case for most people. In these situations, it often comes down to a couple different things. And the first is prioritization. So what's most important to you? If you have competing goals and can only save for one, which is going to mean the most to you and give you the most satisfaction? And figuring this out often involves taking the time to think about your goals and your vision for your life and decide which of those goals are most aligned with that vision and are going to bring you closer to it. The second thing to consider is time horizon. It's common to face a situation where you have equally important goals, but with different time frames. For example, saving a certain amount for college and a certain amount for a down payment in a few years. And when that's the case, assuming these goals are equally important to you, it can make sense to prioritize the near-term goal for the time being, since you have a shorter timeline to reach it. Once that goal is achieved, you can then refocus and reallocate your cash flow on the other goals. Another point we want to make when it comes to the qualitative side of things is to know that it's okay to spend more if you have the ability to do so. Some people are able to save and invest to meet all their goals and still have some left over, or cut back on their saving and investing while still meeting their goals. When thinking about the cash flow discussion, it can be easy to focus on savings and trying to maximize everything there. But for us, it's really important that people also enjoy life along the way and don't sacrifice everything now for some expectation that they'll be able to enjoy it at some future point. It's really all about balance. And something to keep in mind here is that studies have shown that spending on others and spending on experiences tends to produce much more satisfaction than spending on objects or material possessions. So be aware of that. And one last point here is that everyone's expectations around cash flow and money are relative. I think it was Chris Rock who jokingly said that if Bill Gates woke up with Oprah's net worth, he would jump out a window. So the message is don't compare to other people and instead focus on what works for you. Now that we understand both sides of the coin, with the quantitative and qualitative dimensions, what's the best approach for allocating cash flow for the typical physician?
Yeah, we find that the best approach tends to be a balanced one. And the reason is that finances is just one part of your life. And like you mentioned, Trent, we're not computers and you don't live in an Excel spreadsheet where you make decisions based solely on what's optimal. And because of that, balancing the emotional decisions with the financial decisions usually results in people feeling better about making progress in all the different areas, paying down debt faster than required, saving more toward retirement, and also making progress for other goals like college savings or that forever home. Now, having said that, we do always recommend that you start with that retirement goal first and work backwards. And that's because this is the longest goal away to save for, but also the easiest to procrastinate on. And after you know that you're saving enough for retirement, then you can start prioritizing how you want to start making progress towards those other goals and in what order. And this will be different for everyone based on your unique circumstances and preferences. And so if you're thinking back to that water pitcher analogy, after you fill up enough water in that retirement cup, that's when you then start to think about which cup is next and how much water you want to pour into this. And this is why it's so helpful to have context around what's required to save each year to fully meet all of your goals and when you need to fund them. For example, having enough for college or buying that next house in 3 years, because it allows you to understand the different trade-offs. And we all have a finite amount of cash flow each year, and life is fluid where things change over time. And so you may decide that a family vacation is really important this year, and because of that, you're going to have less to save toward that forever house, which at that point, you could decide that it's okay to wait another 6 months on that forever house, because it's perfectly fine to figure out what that right balance is for you. The goal is that you just want to make sure it's an intentional decision of striking that right balance of saving for tomorrow while also enjoying things along the way. And the other nice part of this approach of figuring out your saving targets first and making sure you're on track there is that it can be liberating to spend the excess. So instead of arbitrarily worrying that you need to save more or you're overspending, we try to encourage people to enjoy that, quote unquote, guilt-free spending after they know that they hit those saving targets. And, it's kind of like a reverse budget type approach, since we know not everyone cares to go through a detailed monthly budget. And this is why money and money decisions are squishy without any one-size-fits-all answer. And it's important to recognize that even if you do come up with your ideal cash flow allocation today, it doesn't need to be set in stone, and things can and will change over time, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, as with most things in financial planning, it's not a set it and forget it type of situation. Life changes and priorities change, and it's important to evolve and adapt over time. And I even think about it in my own life and how my own cash flow allocation has evolved over time. Back when it was just my wife and myself after we got married, we were focused on jumpstarting our retirement savings and saving for a down payment for our first house. Then we bought a townhouse in Chicago and we had our first child, so saving for college took the place of that down payment. Then we had our second child and started planning our move to Michigan, so we then had college savings for 2 kids, and we were once again saving for another down payment, this time for a bigger house in Michigan for the growing family. Then we ended up buying our place in Michigan and we had a third child, so we directed even more toward college savings, especially now that we're no longer saving for a down payment. So as you can see, it's constantly changing and it'll continue to change in the future. And for my boys, I guess we'll see how their athletic careers develop, and maybe I'll be saving less for college and hoping for that D1 scholarship.
Yeah, same for my son, Grant. I really think he has potential after this first month of life. But regardless of what you settle on with your ideal cash flow allocation right now, one of the things we always encourage people to do is to automate that allocation whenever possible. And the reason automation is so helpful is because it helps you to pay yourself first before you have a chance to spend it. And that way you're making progress on those goals and you don't have to rely on willpower or deciding each month how much you should save. For retirement, this is often the easiest because your retirement contributions are typically deducted automatically from your paycheck. Whereas saving for these other goals like college or a down payment in the future requires you to take an additional step to set up these automatic contributions. However, it's really easy to do, and we help our clients set up recurring savings amounts each month, similar to how you save for retirement. So for example, once you know your saving targets for college, you can set up an automatic monthly contribution from your bank account to your state's 529 plan. And the same is true for saving to a taxable account by setting up that automatic link.
So that covers it with what we wanted to discuss about allocating your cash flow. As we mentioned, this is one of the most common questions we come across, and as you can tell from our discussion, there are a lot of nuances, and it's not something that can be handled in a one-size-fits-all way. The answer is going to be different depending on each person and their situation. But just to summarize some of the key points. So first, make sure you understand what cash flow is. It's your income minus the taxes you pay. Consider both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects. So don't focus on just the numbers, but make sure you take into account some of the other factors as well. Understand that a balanced approach tends to be best for most people, and the way you allocate your cash flow can and most likely will change over time. And lastly, always automate your cash flow allocation whenever possible, just to remove willpower from the process and ensure that you're hitting your targets. And we know that the process of allocating your cash flow can be a lot like managing your time. We all have a finite amount of it, and there are trade-offs involved, since spending more in one area means spending less in another. So it's all about balance and what's most important to you. And when it comes to money, we always view it as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. So the key is to use it in a way that's going to meet your financial goals, but also maximize your life satisfaction along the way and allow you to sleep well at night.
Exactly. It reminds me of one of my favorite short stories, and it's the parable of the fisherman. And so this parable goes that there's a boat docked in a tiny Mexican village, and an American tourist complimented the fisherman on the quality of his fish and asked how long it took him to catch them. And not very long, answered the fisherman. Well, then the American asks, well, then why don't you stay out longer and catch more? And the fisherman explained that his small catch was sufficient to meet his needs and those of his family. Well, then the American asks, but what do you do with the rest of your time? Well, the fisherman responded, I sleep late, fish a little, play with my children, and I take a siesta with my wife. In the evenings, I go into the village to see my friends, have a few drinks, play the guitar, and sing a few songs. I have a full life. But the American interrupted and said, I have an MBA from Harvard, and I can help you. You should start by fishing longer every day. You can then sell those extra fish you catch, and with that extra revenue, you can buy a bigger boat. And after that, the fisherman asked, well, with the extra money that larger boat would bring, you can have a second one, and then buy a third one, and so on until you have an entire fleet of different boats. And instead of selling your fish to a middleman, you can then negotiate directly with the processing plants and maybe even open your own plant. You can then leave this little village and move to Mexico City, Los Angeles, or even New York City. And from there, you can direct your huge new enterprise. And how long would that take? Asked the fisherman. 20, perhaps 25 years, replied the American. And after that, the fisherman asked. Well, afterwards, my friend, that's where it gets really interesting, answered the American. He was laughing. Well, when your business gets really big, you can start buying and selling stocks and make millions. Wow, millions, really. And what would I do after that? The fisherman asked. Well, here's the best part. After that, you'll be able to retire, live in a tiny village near the coast, sleep late and play with your children, catch a few fish and take a siesta with your wife, and spend some evenings drinking and enjoying times with your friend. And all the fisherman could do is just smile after that.
It's such a great story and one of my favorites as well. Just a great reminder of the importance of keeping that bigger perspective. Well, thank you all for joining us for another episode of the show. We've really been enjoying doing the podcast and the feedback and questions we've been receiving from our listeners. If you do have anything to share, please email us at info@mdwmllc.com. You can also visit the podcast page of our website at mdwmllc.com/podcast, where you can access the show notes and everything we covered today, including a link to a blog post we wrote on cash flow allocation a while back. Well, take care, everyone, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Want even more ideas, tools, and resources on how to make smart financial decisions? Check out the resources section of MD Wealth Management's website at mdwmllc.com, where you'll find additional knowledge and insight from Michigan physicians, including a blog, ebook, and one-page guides. While there, you can also schedule a 15-minute conversation with Andrew and Trent to learn more about what it means to work with the firm and how they serve physicians. If you've enjoyed the content, please leave a review on iTunes and share with your friends and colleagues. Thanks so much for listening. Andrew Mushbaugh and Trent DeBruin are certified financial planners, principals, and co-founders of MD Wealth Management, a registered investment advisory firm in the state of Michigan. All opinions shared in the show are for general information and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future returns. Please consult with your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before making any decisions.